My name is Brooke, and I am 26. To understand why I am standing here today, watching the sunset over a skyline I now own a significant piece of, you have to understand the weight of the silence I carried for 24 hours. Growing up, my mother, Elena, was my entire world. But I was always the accessory to her ambition. She was beautiful, vibrant, and perpetually searching for a life that felt more expensive than the one we had. I spent my 20s working 3 jobs, putting myself through night school, and making sure her rent was paid whenever her latest venture or latest boyfriend fell through. I never complained because that is what daughters do, or at least that is what I thought daughters did. 2 days before her wedding to Julian, a man who treated me like a smudge on a polished floor. I sat in my cramped studio apartment eating a bowl of instant noodles. I checked my lottery app almost as a joke, a weekly ritual of throwing $5 into a digital wishing well. When the numbers matched, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I sat in total, deafening silence. $180 million. After taxes and the lump sum deduction, it was still an amount of money that felt fictional. My first thought wasn't about a car or a mansion. It was about Elena. I thought, finally, I can give her the security she has been chasing her whole life. I can buy her the peace she thinks she is finding in Julian. I spent the next day in a daze, meeting with a secret legal team and a wealth manager. I told them I wanted to set up a trust. I wanted to transfer $22 million into an account for my mother as a wedding surprise. I wanted the notification to hit her phone right before she walked down the aisle, so she would know she was entering that marriage out of love, not out of a desperate need for Julian's bank account. I spent hours drafting a letter to go with it, telling her how much I loved her and how I wanted her to never worry again. I felt like a hero in a movie. I felt like I was finally enough. The morning of the wedding, I was getting ready in my cheap bridesmaid dress, the one she made me pay for myself even though I was struggling with my electric bill. I was pinning my hair back, looking at my reflection and smiling, because I knew that within hours, our lives would change forever. Then, my phone buzzed on the vanity. It was a text from my mother. It didn't start with a greeting. It said, "Daughter, I have been thinking about this all night, and I talked it over with Julian. We both agree it is better if you do not come today. Julian thinks your presence is a bit of an embarrassment to his family. You do not really fit the aesthetic of the event, and your car is an eyesore. He is worried you will make a scene or ask for money in front of his business partners. Please just stay home. I will send you some cake in a box next week. Do not reply. I am busy with my hair." I stared at the screen until the blue light burned my retinas. The word embarrassment echoed in my head. I looked at the dress I had saved for months to buy. I looked at the worn-out shoes I had polished until they shone. Most importantly, I looked at the banking app on my phone, where the $22 million transfer was marked as pending, scheduled to release in exactly 3 hours. My mother had spent my entire life making me feel like a burden. But this was the final, sharpest blade. She wasn't just choosing a man over her daughter. She was choosing a brand. She was choosing a false image of wealth over the person who had actually kept her afloat when she had nothing. Julian was a mid-level real estate developer who acted like a billionaire, and my mother was so intoxicated by his leased Mercedes and his rented tuxedo that she was willing to discard her only child to keep the fantasy alive. I felt a coldness wash over me that I had never experienced before. It wasn't anger. It was a total, clinical realization. The woman I was trying to save didn't want to be saved by me. She wanted to be seen without me. I picked up my phone and called my wealth manager, Marcus. He answered on the second ring, his voice professional and calm. He asked if everything was ready for the transfer. I told him no. I told him to cancel it immediately. I heard the clicking of keys on the other end. He asked if I wanted to reschedule it or move the funds to a different trust. I told him to move every single cent into a private holding company under my name only. I told him I wanted to start looking at properties. Specifically, I wanted him to look into the mortgage on the estate where the wedding was being held. The estate was massive, sprawling vineyard that Julian claimed to own a stake in. As it turned out, through the quick research Marcus did while I stayed on the line, Julian didn't own a stake. He was months behind on the venue fees and had promised to pay the balance using the dowry and gift money he expected to receive from his wealthy guests today. He was a fraud, just like the life my mother was trying to buy into. I took off the bridesmaid dress and let it fall to the floor. I put on a silk suit I had purchased the day before, a piece of quiet luxury that cost more than my mother's entire wedding budget. I called a private car service. I wasn't going to the wedding as a guest. I wasn't going as an embarrassment. I was going as the woman who held the strings to their entire future. As I sat in the back of the black SUV, watching the city blur past, I looked at the cancellation confirmation on my screen. The $22 million was back in my primary account. I thought about the text she sent. "Daughter, don't come." She was right. Brooke, the struggling daughter who paid her mother's bills, wasn't coming. Someone else was. I arrived at the vineyard just as the ceremony was about to begin. I could see the white flowers, the expensive chairs, and the elite crowd of people who Julian wanted to impress. I stood at the edge of the property, hidden by the tall hedges, and watched my mother. She looked beautiful, but she looked anxious. She was scanning the crowd, likely making sure I hadn't ignored her text. She didn't see me. She only saw the world she thought she belonged in. I pulled out my phone and sent one final message to the venue manager, who I had contacted on the drive over. I had already wired the full amount of Julian's debt to the venue, but with a very specific condition. I now held the contract for the event. I owned the air they were breathing. I told the manager to wait for my signal. The music started. The classic strings of a quartet began to play. Julian stood at the altar, looking smug, adjusting his cufflinks. My mother began her walk down the aisle. This was the moment she had dreamed of, the moment she finally became the woman of status she always wanted to be. And this was the moment I realized that revenge isn't about shouting. It is about the quiet withdrawal of support. I watched as she reached the altar. I watched Julian take her hand, and then I walked out from behind the hedge. I didn't head toward the seats. I walked straight toward the front, my heels clicking on the stone path with a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. The guests began to whisper. My mother's face went pale. Julian's eyes narrowed with a fury that promised a scene. He stepped forward, probably ready to have me escorted out. I didn't give him the chance. I didn't look at him. I looked at my mother. I held up my phone so she could see the screen. It wasn't a text message this time. It was the bank notification, the one that showed a canceled transfer of $22 million. She didn't understand the numbers at first, but she understood the word canceled in bright red letters. I leaned in close as the officiant stopped speaking. The silence was absolute. I whispered just loud enough for the two of them to hear. "You told me not to come because I'm an embarrassment, Mom. So I took your wedding gift back. By the way, Julian, the venue manager is waiting in the back. He knows your checks bounced. I paid the bill. But I think I'd like my guests to leave now." The look of pure, unadulterated terror on Julian's face was worth more than the $180 million. He knew he was caught. He knew the house of cards was falling. And my mother, she looked at me, then at the phone, then at her new husband. She realized in that second that she had traded a fortune of genuine love and literal wealth for a man who had nothing but a lease suit and a heart full of vanity. I turned around and walked away without looking back. I had a life to start, and for the first time in 26 years, I didn't have to carry her weight. I had my own. As I walked back to the waiting black SUV, the silence of the vineyard was broken by the muffled sound of Julian's voice rising in a panicked pitch. I didn't need to see his face to know that the color was draining from it. The power dynamic had shifted so violently in the span of 60 seconds that the air itself felt heavy with the fallout. I sat in the plush leather seat of the car and told the driver to just go. I didn't give him a destination. I just needed to be moving. Behind me, the white tents and the floral arches of the most expensive mistake of my mother's life grew smaller in the rearview mirror. I looked down at my phone and watched the notifications start to roll in. They were like a barrage of artillery fire. First came the texts from my mother. They started with confusion. "Brooke, what was that? What was that number on your phone? What are you talking about?" Then, as the reality of the situation at the venue began to settle in, the tone changed. "Julian says there's a misunderstanding with the manager. Brooke, come back here right now. You are making a scene and ruining the most important day of my life." I ignored them. I blocked her number temporarily. I needed clarity, not the frantic manipulation she had mastered over 2 decades. I called Marcus, my wealth manager, again. I told him I wanted a full audit of Julian's assets. I wanted to know every penny he owed and to whom. If he wanted to call me an embarrassment, I wanted to see exactly what he was hiding behind his curated facade of success. By the time I reached a high-end hotel in the city one, where I had booked a suite under a corporate alias, Marcus had sent over a preliminary file. It was worse than I thought. Julian wasn't just a struggling developer. He was a predatory debtor. He had been using my mother's modest savings and her credit score to secure bridge loans for projects that didn't exist. He had convinced her to co-sign on a lifestyle they couldn't afford, promising that the wedding would act as a networking event to secure his next big deal. He didn't love her. He was using her as a human shield against his creditors. And she had been so blinded by the sparkle of his false promises that she had pushed away the only person who actually had the means to protect her. I spent the evening in the quiet luxury of the suite, staring out at the lights of the city. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about how to pay the rent or how to fix my mother's problems. I was thinking about the concept of value. My mother valued the appearance of wealth. Julian valued the power of deception. I had spent my life valuing loyalty, and it had been used against me. Now, I had the ultimate equalizer. I had $180 million and a heart that had finally gone cold. I realized that if I really wanted my revenge to be calm, it couldn't just be a scene at a wedding. It had to be a complete dismantling of the world they tried to build on my back. The next morning, the news of the wedding collapse began to leak through social circles. Apparently, after I left, the venue manager had indeed informed Julian in front of his prestigious guests that the event insurance and the final payments had been flagged for fraud. The catering staff had stopped serving. The music had died. The elite business partners Julian had been trying to impress left in a flurry of whispers and judgmental glances. My mother had been left standing at an altar in a dress that wasn't paid for, next to a man who was being questioned by the venue's security team. I received an email from a private investigator I had hired alongside Marcus. He found that Julian had a history of this. He would find women with decent credit, sweep them off their feet, and leave them in financial ruin once the loans were spent. My mother was just his latest mark, but he had made one fatal error. He hadn't accounted for me. He had assumed I was the weak link, the daughter who would just take the insults and stay in the shadows. He hadn't realized that the person he called an embarrassment was now the person who could buy his entire debt portfolio. I instructed Marcus to start buying every outstanding loan Julian had, every piece of paper that tied him to a creditor. I wanted it bought up by my holding company. I didn't want him to go to jail, not yet. I wanted him to owe me. I wanted him to wake up every morning knowing that his landlord, his car lease provider, and his business lenders were all just different masks for the daughter he had tried to exile. 3 days after the wedding, I finally unblocked my mother's number. My phone immediately exploded with 300 missed calls and twice as many messages. I chose to call her back while I was sitting in a lawyer's office, finalizing the purchase of the very apartment building she lived in. She picked up on the first half ring. "Brooke, where are you? Do you have any idea what you've done? Julian is in a state. He says you sabotaged the payment system. He says you're lying about the money. He's going to sue you for defamation." I let her talk. I let the hysteria climb until her voice cracked. Then I spoke in the calmest tone I could muster. Mom, stop. Julian isn't suing anyone. He can't afford the filing fee. I have the records. I know about the bridge loans. I know he used your name to lease the Mercedes. I also know that the $22 million you saw on my screen was very real. It was your wedding gift, or it was going to be. Before you told me I was an embarrassment, there was a long, suffocating silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, heavy and ragged. Then, a small, trembling voice asked, "You really have that much money?" I didn't answer the question directly. I told her I bought your building this morning. Mom, the one you and Julian were planning to live in while you looked for a mansion. I own it now, and I just saw the lease agreement Julian signed using your forged signature. It's invalid. You have 30 days to find a new place to live, unless you can prove you have the income to stay, which we both know you don't, because you gave Julian everything. Brooke, please. She sobbed. You're my daughter. You can't do this to your own mother. We're family. Family doesn't send a text message telling their child they are an eyesore on their wedding day. I replied. Family doesn't choose a con artist over the person who has been paying their bills for years. You wanted a life without me because I didn't fit the aesthetic. Well, now you have it. You have Julian, you have your aesthetic, and you have exactly $0 of my money. I hung up. I didn't feel the rush of joy I expected. Instead, I felt a profound sense of peace. It was the peace of a debt being settled. But I wasn't done with Julian. He was the one who had whispered in her ear. He was the one who had convinced her that I was the enemy. My mother was guilty of vanity and weakness, but Julian was guilty of malice. I set a meeting with him for the following day. I told him to meet me at a high-end coffee shop in the financial district. I wanted him to see me in my element surrounded by people who actually had the wealth he only pretended to possess. When he walked in, he looked haggard. The bravado was gone, replaced by a twitchy, desperate energy. He sat down across from me, trying to muster a smirk. You think you're so smart, don't you? He hissed. You think a little bit of luck makes you better than me? I'll have that money tied up in court for years. I'll tell the world you stole it or that it's laundered. I took a sip of my coffee and pushed a manila envelope across the table. In it were the titles to his debts. I watched his eyes scan the documents. I watched the moment he realized that his car, his office equipment, and even his personal credit line were now owned by my company. You're not going to court, Julian, I said, because if you do, I'll release the evidence of the forged signatures you used on my mother's accounts. I'll release the records of the shell companies you used to hide assets from your previous ex-wife. Right now, you owe me $400,000 in immediate arrears. I'm giving you a choice. You sign a full confession of your financial fraud regarding my mother. You agree to an immediate annulment of the marriage, and you leave the state. If you do that, I'll forgive the debt and I won't call the police. He looked at the papers, his hands shaking. He looked at me, looking for a shred of the girl he thought he could bully. He found nothing. He signed as he walked out. Defeated and broken, I realized that the hardest part of revenge and the act itself is the aftermath of seeing the people you once loved for who they truly are. I had saved my mother from a predator, but I had also lost a mother in the process. She had chosen the shark, and I had simply removed the water. I went back to my hotel and looked at my bank balance. It was still astronomical. I had spent a few million on the properties and the debts, but the core of the fortune was untouched. I realized I could do anything. I could go anywhere. But first, I had to deal with the woman who was currently sitting on the steps of her apartment building, waiting for a daughter she had disowned via text message. I drove there myself. I didn't take the SUV. I took a modest car I had bought for cash. I saw her from a block away. She looked small. She looked old. The glamour of the wedding had been stripped away, leaving only the reality of a woman who had gambled her life on a lie and lost. I pulled up to the curb and rolled down the window. She ran toward the car, hope lighting up her eyes. Brooke, thank God, you sent him away, didn't you? You fixed it. I looked at her, and for a second, I wanted to open the door. I wanted to tell her it was okay and that we could go back to how things were. But then I remembered the text. I remembered the years of being an afterthought. I fixed it for myself. Mom, I said, Julian is gone. He signed the annulment papers. You're free from him, but you're also free from me. I've set up a small annuity for you, enough for a modest apartment and groceries in a different city. It's not 22 million, but it's more than you deserve after what you said to me. But Brooke, she started to cry. I'm moving away. I interrupted. I'm starting a foundation for women who have been financially abused. I'm going to use this money to make sure people like Julie and never win. And as for you, I hope you find a way to be happy with a life that isn't a lie. Don't call me. I'll have my lawyers reach out with the details. I drove away. And this time, I didn't look in the mirror. I had my calm revenge. And now, I was going to have my life. The weeks following the confrontation at the vineyard felt like waking up from a lifelong fever. I had moved into a penthouse in a city 300 miles away, a place where the air felt thinner and the light felt clearer. I spent my mornings watching the fog roll over the harbor, nursing a cup of tea, and realizing that for the first time in my 26 years, no one was calling me to demand a payment or ask for a favor. But the calm was deceptive. Revenge is not a single event. It is a chemical reaction that continues to burn long after the initial spark. My mother had taken the annuity the first offered, but she hadn't taken it quietly. She began a campaign of public mourning on social media. She posted photos of us from when I was a child, captioned with cryptic messages about how money changes people and how heartbreaking it is to lose a daughter to greed. She didn't mention the text she sent me. She didn't mention Julian's fraud or the fact that I had saved her from total homelessness. She painted a picture of a grieving mother cast aside by her cold-hearted millionaire. Her friends, or the people she called friends, chimed in with supportive comments, calling me ungrateful and cruel. It was a digital trial, and I was being found guilty in the court of public opinion. I watched it all from my high-rise sanctuary, feeling a familiar sting. Even with $180 million, she could still make me feel like that little girl who wasn't quite good enough. I called Marcus and told him about the posts. I asked him if we should release the truth, the text message, the records of Julian's debt, the proof of her betrayal. Marcus looked at me with the steady and impressed eyes of a man who had seen much larger fortunes crumble. He told me that if I fought her in the mud, I would get dirty. He said the best way to handle a person who lives for attention is to starve them of it. But I wasn't just looking for silence anymore. I wanted her to understand the depth of what she had traded away. I decided to use a portion of my wealth to purchase a historic building in the center of her new town, a small, quiet suburb where I had moved her to keep her out of trouble. I turned the building into a community center focused on financial literacy and vocational training for young women. I named it the Brooke Foundation. I didn't do it to be a saint. I did it because I knew that every time she walked down the main street to buy her groceries with the small allowance I provided, she would have to pass a massive, beautiful monument to the daughter she had called an embarrassment. She would see the lines of women entering the building to build their futures, and she would know that their success was funded by the very person she had discarded. Meanwhile, Julian hadn't disappeared as easily as I'd hoped. He was a cockroach, and cockroaches are designed to survive the blast. He had fled the state as agreed, but he had started reaching out to my mother again. He was whispering in her ear, telling her that I had manipulated him into signing those papers. He was feeding her delusions, trying to find a way back into the orbit of my money. He didn't know that I had a security team monitoring her communications, not because I cared about her well-being in a sentimental way, but because she was the only vulnerability I had left. I received a report that Julian had met her at a diner on the outskirts of her town. He was trying to convince her to sue me for a larger share of the lottery winnings, claiming that since I was her dependent for so many years, she was legally entitled to half. It was a laughable legal theory, but Julian was desperate. He was living out of a motel and looking for one last score. He told her that if they won, they could finally have the wedding they deserved. And the most heartbreaking part, my mother was listening. She was nodding. She was falling for the same lie that had already destroyed her once. That was the moment I realized that some people don't want to be saved. They want to be validated in their own destruction. I decided to give them exactly what they wanted. I instructed my legal team to send my mother a formal invitation to a gala I was hosting at the foundation's grand opening. I told them to make it look like an olive branch. I wanted her to think I was softening. I wanted her to think the money was finally weighing on my conscience, and that I was ready to bring her back into the fold. The night of the gala arrived. The building was glowing with amber lights, filled with the city's most influential philanthropists, and the women the foundation was helping. I wore a gown that cost more than my mother's failed wedding, a deep emerald silk that made me look like the authority I had become. I saw her enter the room, and my heart didn't even skip a beat. She had Julian with her. He was wearing a cheap, off-the-rack suit, trying to look like he belonged. They walked in with their heads high, thinking they were walking into a trap they had set for me. They approached me near the stage. "Brooke, darling," my mother said, her voice dripping with a fake, honeyed warmth. "It is so wonderful to see you doing something so charitable. Julian and I have been talking, and we think it's time we move past the bitterness. We're a family, after all." Julian stepped forward, offering a hand I didn't take. "Brooke, I know we had our differences, but your mother deserves the best. We've consulted some experts, and we think there's a much more equitable way to manage your new assets, for the sake of your mother's health." Of course, I looked at them both. I looked at the grease on Julian's collar and the desperate hunger in my mother's eyes. I signaled to the tech booth. The music in the room faded out, and the large screens behind the stage, which had been showing photos of the foundation's work, suddenly changed. It was a video, not of the foundation, but of the diner where they had met 2 days prior. I had audio too. Julian's voice filled the room, crystal clear. "We just need to get her to sign the power of attorney, Elena. Once we have that, we can drain the trust and leave her with nothing. She's just a lucky kid who doesn't know how to handle real power." My mother's response followed. "I know, Julian. She was always so easy to trick. She'll do anything if she thinks I finally love her." The room went dead silent. The donors, the press, the city officials, everyone was staring at the screen, then at the 2 people standing in front of me. My mother's face went from a mask of fox love to a mask of pure horror. Julian looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. I took the microphone from the podium. I didn't raise my voice. I spoke with a cold, terrifying clarity. My mother once texted me that I was an embarrassment. She told me I didn't fit the aesthetic of her life. She was right. I don't fit into a life built on lies, greed, and the exploitation of others. I invited you here tonight not to reconcile, but to show everyone, and especially you, what true value looks like. Value isn't a bank balance. It's the ability to walk through a room without having to hide who you are. I looked at my mother, whose eyes were now welling with tears that I knew were for herself, not for me. "The annuity is canceled, Mom. As of 5 minutes ago, the lease on your apartment has been terminated. You and Julian are perfectly suited for each other. You both have nothing, and now you have it together. Security, please escort these people out. They are an embarrassment to the aesthetic of this event." As the guards led them away, Julian tried to scream something about his rights, but he was drowned out by the sudden burst of applause from the crowd. I stood on that stage and realized that the weight I had been carrying wasn't just my mother's expectations, it was the hope that she might one day change. Now, the hope was dead, and I had never felt lighter. I spent the rest of the night talking to people who actually wanted to change the world. I laughed, I drank expensive champagne, and I didn't think about the text message once. I had built a fortress of my own making, and the gates were closed to anyone who didn't know how to treat a daughter like a human being. When the gala ended, I walked out to my car. The city air was cool and crisp. I checked my phone. One new message. It was from a number I didn't recognize, but I knew it was her. It simply said, "Brooke, please. I have nowhere to go." I didn't reply. I didn't block it. I just deleted it. I looked up at the building I had built, the one with my name on it, and I knew that the story of the embarrassed daughter was over. The story of the woman who owned her future was just beginning. The aftermath of the gala felt like the final exhale after a decade of holding my breath. The news of the public exposure spread through the city like a wildfire. But I didn't stay to watch the smoke. I took a week to travel alone, sitting on a quiet beach where the only sound was the tide pulling at the sand. I thought about the $22 million I had almost given away and realized that money is nothing more than a magnifying glass. It doesn't change who you are. It just makes you more of what you already were. My mother was always a woman who looked for the easy way out, and Julian was always a man who looked for a way to steal it. I was always the girl who worked until my hands bled to make things right. Now, I was just a woman with the resources to ensure that work actually meant something. When I returned to the city, the finality of my decision had begun to settle into the reality of my daily life. My mother had reached out through 3 different lawyers, all of whom had dropped her case within 48 hours once my team presented the evidence of her recorded conspiracy with Julian. There was no case for a daughter's lottery winnings when the mother had publicly disowned her and then privately plotted to defraud her. She was living in a small motel on the outskirts of the state, her social media accounts deactivated, her circle of superficial friends having vanished the moment they realized she was no longer a gateway to my wealth. She had become the very thing she feared most. Invisible, Julian, predictably, didn't stay with her. Once the annuity was cut off and the prospect of a lawsuit evaporated, he disappeared. He left her with the motel bill and a suitcase full of clothes that no longer fit the life she was trying to lead. I heard through the grapevine that he had moved back to his hometown to try the same grift on a smaller scale. But my team had already flagged his name with every major credit bureau and local law enforcement agency. I didn't want him in jail. I wanted him to be forced to live an honest, difficult life where no one believed a word he said. That was a far worse prison for a man like him. I spent the next several months focusing entirely on the foundation. We expanded the program to 3 other cities, providing not just financial aid, but legal protection for women who were being squeezed out of their own lives by people who claimed to love them. I sat in on the classes, sometimes anonymously, listening to these women talk about the shame they felt for being manipulated. I told them my story, not the part about the $180 million, but the part about the text message. I told them that the moment someone tells you that you are an embarrassment is the moment they lose the right to be a part of your success. One afternoon, a letter arrived at my office. It wasn't from a lawyer or a business partner. It was a handwritten note on cheap, lined paper. I recognized the frantic, looping script immediately. It was from my mother. It wasn't an apology. It was a list of grievances, followed by a plea for a second chance. She wrote about how cold the motel was, how her joints ached, and how she missed the daughter I used to be. She didn't miss me. She missed the version of me that was easy to control and quick to forgive. She missed the bank account that didn't talk back. I sat with that letter for a long time. I thought about the girl I was at 25, working double shifts at the diner and coming home to find her mother crying about a credit card bill. I thought about how I used to feel responsible for her happiness. Then I remembered the image of her walking down the aisle, looking at me with nothing but disdain, because I didn't fit her aesthetic. I realized then that forgiveness is for people who recognize their mistakes, not for people who are just sorry they got caught. I didn't burn the letter. I put it in a file labeled "The Past" and locked it in a drawer. I wouldn't be replying. I decided to take one last trip back to the town where it all began. I wanted to see the vineyard one more time, not as a victim, but as the owner. While the world thought I was just a wealthy philanthropist, I had quietly completed the purchase of the estate where the wedding had failed. I didn't keep it as a vineyard. I turned it into a retreat for the women in my foundation, a place where they could come to rest, to learn, and to realize that their value wasn't tied to the people who tried to diminish them. Standing on the same balcony where my mother had once stood in her white dress, I looked out over the rolling hills. The air was sweet with the smell of ripening grapes and fresh rain. I felt a sense of completion that no amount of money could buy. I had taken a moment of ultimate humiliation and turned it into a legacy of strength. I had watched my mother try to trade her daughter for a fantasy, and I had used that trade to build a reality that would help thousands of others. The $22 million transfer that was once a gift of love had become a seed for something much larger. It was now a shield for the vulnerable. I realized that my mother's text message was actually the greatest gift she ever gave me. It was the truth. It was the moment she showed me exactly who she was so that I could finally decide who I wanted to be. I wasn't the embarrassment. I wasn't the eyesore. I was the architect of my own life. I checked my phone one last time before heading back to the city. No more messages from unknown numbers. No more alerts about Julian's legal threats. Just a notification from my bank reminding me of the interest accrued on a trust I had set up for a local orphanage. I smiled, slid the phone into my pocket, and walked down the stone steps. My car, a high-end, reliable vehicle that I drove myself, was waiting at the gate. I didn't need a driver, and I certainly didn't need anyone's permission to be exactly where I was. As I drove away from the vineyard, I saw a woman walking along the side of the road, carrying a heavy bag of groceries. For a split second, I thought it was her. My heart constricted with a ghost of the old guilt. But as I passed, I saw it was a stranger, a woman with a determined look on her face, heading toward a house that was likely hers. I kept driving. I had learned the hard way that you can't carry everyone's bags for them, especially if they're planning to drop them on your head the moment they find someone they think is better. I am Brooke. I am 26. I am a millionaire, a philanthropist, and a survivor of the people who were supposed to love me most. My life is no longer an aesthetic. It is a foundation. And for the first time, the silence and heavy. It's perfect. The story of my revenge and about the money I kept or the people I humbled. It's about the fact that I can look in the mirror and see a woman who doesn't need a text message to know her worth. I am exactly where I belong. Please like and share this video if you believe that everyone deserves a chance to stand up for themselves. If you have a story of your own, leave it in the comments below. I read every single one. Thank you for being a part of this journey with me. To see more stories of people standing up for themselves and finding justice in the most unexpected ways, please subscribe to my channel. My calm revenge